Yeah, it's still a professor at UC Davis. I just want to clarify there's a lot of confusion. I'm getting a lot of messages like, is Dr. Enderle leaving? Like, what's going on? No, he does not have a terminal illness, even though that is what this is based off of. It's based off of a book about a professor who had terminal illness, so he would give these last lectures, talks about like these grand, like, things. So, thank you so much for coming out, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Enderle now and give him
All right, well, welcome everybody. I don't know what you're doing here, but that's awesome. You would come. I don't know anybody's current 2A student. Is anybody in my 2A class? Oh my God. Wow, hi. This is it. I'm not going to go back. Not the final. There is no hope. It does make me a little nervous thinking of this because I was like, it's a little eerie thinking this is it, this is my last lecture. So we've been biking here. I thought a couple times I thought a car was going to hit me. Yeah, I'm just gonna like share some of my stories and stuff and things that I think about. I don't usually think about dying, so this is not my normal stick. And I didn't think you'd want to see me do a titration problem, so I'm somewhere in between those things. I think this is supposed to be inspirational, but chemistry is kind of the opposite of inspirational. So it's just stuff. And the committee was asking me, oh, what's the title of what I'm going to talk about? And all I could think of was stuff. So I couldn't email them back because I just could not think of anything else. Now, last spring, I did this like TED event. Woo! Yeah, cool. You know enough about TED and you need to get with it, with social media and stuff. And I did this event, and I was walking in. This was like when I was actually speaking, but when I was walking in, they have a green room. And in the green room, that's where you're supposed to go as a speaker. They have several speakers that day, and maybe about a dozen. And you're supposed to go into the green room before you're speaking to relax, chill out, eat some donuts, whatever. And that's exactly what I was hoping on doing. However, when I got over there, and the TED people are totally cool, except for this one guy. He was a volunteer, and when I walked into the green room, and there was a bunch of other speakers there, probably like 6 speakers there, a couple volunteers, and this one guy. And I was going to speak, as you can see, on science and God. And so he came up to me immediately upon me entering the green room, and he said, I don't believe in this God stuff. That's stupid. You can't prove this stuff. And I was thinking as a speaker, that's not the welcome I was hoping for. I was hoping, nice to meet you, here's a donut. He was a little angsty about the subject, and it was in front of the other speakers, and so I felt like I couldn't just stay silent. So I thought, I have to say something. So I asked him, hey man, do you have a girlfriend? And he said yes. I was just going out on a limb because by him saying that, I thought it was more likely he did it. It's like one of the most awkward things to say to somebody. But then he said, yeah, I do. And I said, can you prove to me that your girlfriend loves you? I was like, oh. He didn't have much to say after that. But then that was like on a roll at that point. So I said, you know what, you can't always use science, impute it into another area, and say you have to use these scientific disciplines to prove blank. You can't do, psychology has their own way of proof, social sciences, the courtroom, science has its own. There's all kinds of different ways where you explain if something's true. It's by reasoning or emotions or whatever, and those are all valid in their own areas, and you can't impute one of those areas into another. Well, that was about all he had to say at that point. But I wanted to make sure the other speakers knew that I believed in my speech. But afterwards, he was also the greeter that welcomed me as I walked off the stage. So I walked off, wasn't quite sure what he was going to say, but he was super happy. He was like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. I love this idea, I'm totally thinking about it. Which I thought was a little bit ridiculousness, but I kind of say that to say, like, even a lot of the things that I think of outside of chemistry doesn't always have like a science background. You know, I'm not always in that stream, although I know you think I live in these rooms here. I go outside when I do other stuff. So, and I have different methods of reasoning or proof or whatever kind of word you want to do for these different areas. And so, you know, even I've used that when I was like, one time I wanted to date a person, another girl, not another, but a, not my current wife. And so I thought I was trying to impose science on that discipline, I guess. And so I thought, okay, I'll be totally logical about this. And she should know me because she doesn't know me yet. But I thought she was cute, so she needs to know me. So I decided I'm going to start showing up at her house. So I started showing up once a week for about 3 weeks. I thought that's enough. She'll know me after 3 weeks. I would just show up and just hang out. And then I thought, okay, after 3 weeks, now she totally knows me. This is time to move in for the kill. So, okay. And I went in, I said, okay, I have something to tell you now. And she said, okay, let's sit down. Perfect. So romantic. And the calculations in my head. And I said, I'm ready to date. Do you want to date? Didn't go over as smoothly as I thought it would. I was not interested whatsoever. But anyways, sometimes those, you know, I was trying to impose something that just didn't make sense with it. And this is how I started to think about life, and I really like the university seal and motto. Does anybody know what the UC motto is? Okay, you don't. It's on your student ID card, I believe. But maybe you never look at that. It's this. Does it look somewhat familiar? Okay, you might not be a UC student, but if you are, you recognize this, and the motto is "Let there be light." And I kind of think of this in a couple different areas. The intellectual, that's most of our favorites because we like to study a lot. And then the emotional. And then the spiritual. And then the physical. So those are kind of areas I thought I would hit today. In different areas. Oh, hi, how's it going, man? Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming. Did somebody make you come here? Okay. How do you think it's going so far? Awesome.
It's going off, I know.
Okay. Oh, yeah. If you were you and I would have asked you to date when I was a student, you would have thought about it at least, not just say no right away. Yeah. And let's start with the intellectual side. And I don't know if this will be a downer, but that's okay. They said I could say whatever I wanted to. So I had a lot of myths of students that they have coming walking into the UC system, walking into classes like my classes, chemistry, science, whatever. So I thought I would share some of those myths and then debunk them. Okay? So here we go. One of those myths that students like to say sometimes is they say like, I can do anything I put my mind to. Really? That's awesome. So you could be a contortionist, or you could be the MVP of a football team, or you could be a horse jockey, or whatever. And what I realized is the only people who say they can do whatever they put their mind to are the people who have just won. You never hear a loser say, I can do anything I put my mind to, because it doesn't make sense whatsoever. And I don't know, if you think about, you know, you would think like, oh, I could be the MVP of the Super Bowl. Well, actually, I guess legally I can't say Super Bowl for litigious reasons. That word's owned by the NFL. So I'm going to follow Colbert, and I'll say, instead of Super Bowl, the Superb Owl. So, the Superb Owl. think that you can do within your abilities and the giftings you have, then you can do what you want. And you can excel totally in those areas, but sometimes we try to bypass our own skill set and do something random in life. Now another myth. Chemistry, and I'll just say chemistry for fun. Chemistry is impossible and really difficult. And let's just, if you want to expand it, you can say physics or civil engineering or whatever. Okay? So it's impossible and it can't be done. Now that, on the flip side, people understand it somehow. Somehow the lame person in your dorms is not studying and always acing exams, and you hate them. You slash their bike tire. It is simple enough for people to get, and if you're taking science classes or things like that, what I recommend, after 15 minutes, if you don't know what the heck you're doing, go see somebody who is smarter than you, and make them make you as smart as them. And if you ever get stuck, that's what I recommend, because somehow people can understand this stuff. You can survive chemistry if you want to be a medical doctor, though I will talk about that in a minute. That's crazy in its own right. But see someone if you get stuck. Now, I have another myth. Anyone can get an A in chemistry, and I'm just focused on chemistry because chemistry is the center of oppression for most people. No, it depends on your talents. I think anybody can improve and do better in their science classes or whatever class you're working on, whatever section degree of life you're going to, but I don't know if you're necessarily going to get an A. But if you go into the skill sets of the areas where you're gifted, you have talents, things are going well, I think you can really excel and do well in those areas. Now, I think most of you, how many of you are freshmen, just to kind of get it? Now, you probably used to believe the following, so I'll say it, but you might not believe it anymore. I got A's in high school, so I can get A's in college. Did everybody stop believing that already? Okay, good. You can do well, but you know, only so many people are going to get A's, but that can be a good thing or a bad thing. If you don't get a good grade, that could be a signal, hey, maybe I'm not in the right major. That's awesome. Better to figure it out now than when you're 5 years into med school. Okay, now, this is, I'm going to pick on the med school people because you make me crazy sometimes. I get a lot of med school and, you know, pre-med people say, I'm going to med school because I want to help people. Now that's awesome that you want to help people. But I can think of a lot better ways to help. Okay, my wife was in the, when my son Isaac was born, he was premature. So she was having premature contractions. And so what happened was she was sleeping one day, you know, well, every day was sleep, but one day we were both sleeping, and then she started spotting. And if you're pregnant, that's not usually a good idea. And so she was spotting, and then she woke up, and we're like, okay, we have to go to the hospital. So we went to the hospital middle of the night, and then we were at the hospital, and they were like doing some tests, and like, oh, actually that's not the problem, you're having contractions. When you're 23 weeks in, that's way too early to start having contractions. So they put her on bed rest in Sacramento for 6 weeks. We were on bed rest in the hospital every day. I saw that crazy MD for about 30 seconds, maybe once a day. Not helpful. But I saw some awesome nurses that would come by every day, all day. And there's a lot of ways you can help people if you want to. You could be a nurse, a physician's assistant. You can be a social worker. They're awesome. A counselor. You can help an old lady across the street, or me, if you want to. There's a lot of ways to help people. And, you know, I would say, if you go into med school, that's awesome, but know why you're going in. Does it fit your passions and your desires and things like that? And it doesn't matter the area you're going into. Does it fit how you're gifted? Now, I know that doesn't work for some people because with family circumstances, you have to be in a certain major. And that's totally understandable. And sometimes you can kind of talk with your family of, you know, do I need to be a doctor, then be a lawyer, investment banker, or do drugs, or whatever. And maybe you can work out some sort of medium of doing something else. Speaking of doing drugs, that kind of makes me think of some other stuff. Sometimes people are in med school to make money. And again, now if you're not moral, there's way better ways to make money. Again, drug dealers make a lot of money. But you can do a lot of things. You can be an investment banker, you can be a lawyer, you can be a crab fisherman in Alaska, ice road trucking, all good shows. There's a lot of ways to make money. Make sure you think about, why am I in the career I'm in? Does it fit also my giftings? And, you know, if you're going to have to support your family afterwards, is it going to help support my family as well? So you do have to be somewhat practical, I totally understand. Okay, now here's a crazy myth. Sometimes students aren't doing well, say in chemistry or whatever, random, so, I don't know. Whatever class you're not doing well in. And often when students come to me in distress, they have a common solution. And that solution is, I'm not doing well, I should study harder. Which is awesome, but that, I don't know if studying harder is always the solution. And you're like, should professors say that out loud? Yes, we should. I had a student one time, this was several years back, so students in my class, I'm not talking about you, even though you might think I am. He was taking practice exams, and he was scoring really well on practice exams. About 95% of the total points is what he was getting every single practice exam. Then he walked into exam 1, and he got about a 60%, which in that quarter, that was a D. And so he came to me. He said, what should I do? I said, this is crazy. It sounds like you're studying really well. You're doing so great on the practice test. But you come into the exam, and you're dropping about 3 standard deviations below, below your initial score. And he was asking, like, what should I do? And I was saying, I think maybe the root of the problem is anxiety. Do you get anxious? He said, yeah, a lot, especially during the test. I was like, maybe you should think about that. And then he said, no, I don't know. I think my solution is going to study harder. I was like, okay, I'm going to study harder to remove anxiety. Doesn't make sense to me, but just you go for it, man. Come see me if it doesn't work. And so he took exam 2. I guess it didn't work because he came back to see me. And the same thing happened. He was acing his practice exams, but getting C. I think he might have got a C, so he improved a little bit on that exam. And I said, you know what, I think let me tell you a story. Imagine there was this guy, and he saw in his house, on the wall, a crack formed. And so what are you going to do? Obviously, you'll fix the crack. So he got some spackle, and he painted over, and then a year later, he saw another crack about in the same place. And so he's like, okay, I'll fix it. I'll plaster it over, I'll paint it, etc. And then the next year, there was another crack. And he was starting to get the idea and realizing, hey, the problem is not the crack. The problem in this case was the foundation. That foundation was flawed, causing an unfixable crack in the wall. And sometimes students try to fix something that's not the real issue. They put a Band-Aid on it. I'm going to study harder. Problem solved. But actually, anxiety has a deeper foundational issue, which I would say is somewhat spiritual in nature. That there is something deeper, more difficult going on that you've got to work with because sometimes the study is going really well. You've got to work with that deeper issue to fix this issue or anxiety thing you're having in class. And that kind of leads me to the spiritual kind of aspect. And what I've noticed is sometimes, and this is probably none of you, because you're here and you obviously don't need to study. So you'd rather listen to me for some weird reason. A lot of students, if their grades are going well, they're super excited, and they're like, their identity is solid gold at that point. I feel awesome. And then they have a test where the grades don't go well. And then their identity is like in the gutter, and they're crushed, humiliated. I can't call my parents. That's okay, I'll tell them I got an A anyways. If they ask, I'll change the subject. They don't even know I had an exam, so it's okay. But the problem is that when we put our identity in something that's changeable, I mean, it could be any time that an instructor gives you an exam and it doesn't go well. And you thought you studied well, and the instructor's crazy, and they put, because instructors are oppressors, I already know that. And the instructor gives you something on the exam that they didn't talk about or you weren't prepared for or whatever, that's always going to happen. It's hard to control those sort of situations. The same thing can happen like in your relationships, in your dating life. Somebody doesn't want to date you. They do want to date you. Then they hate you. Then your dog dies. Whatever. And emotions can go up and down really easily. And if our identity or how I get my self-worth, if it's based on what somebody else thinks of me or how I do in my grades, that's going to be a really rough life. Because life is going to do that all the way through. Sometimes you're going to get a job. Sometimes your boss says something mean to you. Or it just can go up and down all the time. And I believe, from my faith basis, that if God, who's constant, if you can have your identity in something that's more constant, then you don't have to go up and down with the roller coaster of life. So that stress and craziness and whatever can be going on around you, family issues, no money, whatever, be going on around you, but you can still have peace inside. I know that's craziness to some, but whatever. They invited me here, so I guess I get to say whatever I want. Oh, by the way, a little side note on grad school. I don't know, sorry, I just thought of this. If you're going to go to grad school, I think that's awesome. I loved grad school. I liked grad school actually a lot more than undergrad. It was so much better. If you're going to go to grad school, I recommend, especially anybody who's in the sciences here, did you know that you can, if you stick in the sciences, you can probably go to grad school for free? Do you know that? You can go to free and they'll probably give you a stipend. That's money. So you can go for money. I'd recommend, you can start preparing ahead of time, but you may not need to take, do every year I need to do research and get 5 internships and whatever. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. You can find out from your advisors and find out exactly what you need. Ask advisors, ask people in the field of whatever grad school you're going to go to, and they can help you figure out what's the best plan for you. I only had 1 summer of research experience going into grad school. I didn't do anything else. I was tired. So I don't want to be Downton Abbey or whatever you guys watch. Okay, spiritual stuff. Okay, sorry, I got sidetracked, got excited. So I think the spiritual side can be significant. I'll say a little bit more about it later. Emotional, I love it. Everybody loves emotions. Hi, how's it going? Don't worry. Sometimes if I see me, I walk out too. One time, somebody wanted to date me one time, and I was dating. I'm on the emotional side here, relationships and all that. So, and I don't know about you, but I think everybody has some degree of continuum of how much masculine or feminine they have in their personality, no matter if they're male or female. And so my masculine side was kind of coming out when I was dating, and my girlfriend at the time, she had a lot of expectations of our relationship, of which I had no expectations of our relationship. I just wanted to have a good time. But she had expectations of how much romance we should have and how much I should initiate certain conversations and all this stuff. It was crazy. I don't know, has anybody been in a relationship where that kind of happened to you? Sometimes, yeah. You know what I'm talking about? I'm like, what's all this expectations going on? And she would ask me a lot, what's your expectations of me? I was like, I don't have it. That's why we're dating. That's why we're dating you. I don't know. I can't think of any. That's a noob mistake, okay? So here was the next noob mistake that I made. I got really bothered by all these expectations she had of me. And so I was like, what expectation could I have of her? And so I was like, I wanted to hit the top level. So really cranking my mind for this one. And then it came to me one day, I remember we were sitting in the car downtown in Davis. I said, I realized what expectation I would like to have. She's like, oh, what? She was super excited. I was like, I want you to be perfect like God. And when I was brainstorming, I was thinking maybe I should say Mother Teresa Greece, Barney or something. But I was like, no, I'm gonna go all the way. Okay, that did not go over well. Don't do that. A very new mistake. But I don't know, that's because I kind of wanted, in a relationship, I kind of wanted a playbook. But she wanted to relate to me, which I thought was crazy. I just couldn't get used to it. And so what ended up later, then we decided to break up. And so, this is a side story. Here's how not to break up. Okay, what I'm talking about right now. We thought, okay, we need to talk it out, right? Are we going to break up or not? So we went, let's go on a walk. So we went on a walk. But what happened was, when we were at the farthest point in the walk, and this is over by Porto. You know where Porto is, in the Big People's Park? You know what I'm talking about? Over by that structure where people throw those shopping carts into. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, if you're over by Porto, you'll see what I mean. And then we decided, okay, we're going to break up. And then we had about a 20-minute walk back to where I parked my car. Okay, don't do that. If you're going to break up right next to where the exit is. That's the exit out. Anyways, even now when I'm being married to Peg, here's Peg. Okay, there we go. Oh yeah. Yeah, it's a picture. You can clap. I know what you're thinking. Trophy husband. I tell her that regularly. So even when it's like we're dating, get married and all that stuff, often when we're interacting, I want like a playbook. Okay? Like, here's what I'm supposed to do. I just want to know what to do. So she's fairly happy, I'm happy, and it's cool. She doesn't want to tell me what to do. In fact, like if I ask her, hey, what do you want to do on Valentine's Day? Sometimes, usually she doesn't tell me, it's a secret. I have to read her mind. If she knows exactly what she wants to do, and sometimes she's told me, oh, I'd like to go, I want you to initiate, take me out to a restaurant. Cool, I can do that. But then you know what she says? But now that I told you, it's not mysterious anymore, so you can't do it. So then I'm messed up. So, what, and I think this is, and I don't know if I asked you like, oh, what is your relationship like? You know, I wonder what you would tell me, even if you're thinking, if you have a dating relationship. If you're not, that's okay. Not everybody will procreate. That's fine. Is this a shot? It's off. Oh my gosh, I can picture myself all the time. Sometimes we're in this like emotional relationship or whatever. I get in this like, I want to know what to do, like so I can make you at least somewhat happy. So we're double happy, sort of thing. But I realize, over years that that's the new mistake. That's what comes to me naturally, but that's not how people relate. I don't know if you ever heard this before, but sometimes when Peggy gets upset at me or something, emotions are really heavy. If you've ever been in a fight with your significant other and emotions get really heavy, my masculine side is not like that. I take emotions. Even if you're a science guy, sometimes you do have emotions. I have about one or two. And they happen every once in a while. But feelings to me feel like fog. And I'm like in the fog when the feelings are strong. I'm like, come on, Peggy, let me get you out of here. Let me get the fog, let me get out of here. And she experiences feelings and emotions as fact. Like it's real, it's really there, and that's her reality. But when I feel when I'm experiencing those emotions, they're not somewhere I want to be. So I want to get out of relating to her and go somewhere else where she wants me to stick with it. Or sometimes I want to solve her problem. Any problem solvers out there? Oh, like, let me solve your problem. You have an issue? Okay, don't worry about these feelings. We'll talk it out. I'll tell you what to do. How does that that sound like a good idea? Okay, if you do that, that's a new mistake right there. Write that down. Guys or whoever does that, don't do that. And I realized I tried to shortcut the experience in the relational aspect of it. And I had like a spiritual example of this I want to share with you. You might not have ever heard of this before, so that's okay. That's what I'm telling you. That this is a mountain. Okay. Found out Google today. There's a story in the Tanakh, or the Old Testament, in Exodus 19. A super interesting story. If you've never heard of it, it goes like this. So, I don't know if you ever heard of Moses, but you haven't. Watch Prince of Egypt. He helps these people get out of Egypt, whatever. And then they get to this mountain, Mount Sinai, and God kind of speaks to Moses, and he says, okay, hey, I want you to be a kingdom of priests, which is kind of weird, because at that point in the Tanakh, there was no priests yet. It was like, I want everybody to be priests, which, by the way, never happened. But I want everybody to be priests. I want to relate to you, and in 3 days, I want you to meet me at the top of the mountain. Okay, that's what he told everybody. Okay? And so Moses went back, told the people, hey, what do you think? They're like, that sounds cool, okay. But God had one stipulation. He said, and that's what that bottom part is right here. I want to make a border around the mountain, and you can't cross that border before it's time. Okay? So before 3 days, if you cross the border, you're going to die. But if you wait, then the signal will be a trumpet sound. Okay? If you wait for the trumpet sound, you can cross the border and come up to the top. That sounds good. Okay. So 3 days later, God, I guess, is ready. He's ready to land on the mountain on the top. And so, the trumpet goes off. What do you expect people to do? Obviously, they're going to go to the top, right? Borders open, time to go up. Okay? Makes a lot of sense. What do? Nothing. They just stay at camp. They're playing backgammon or whatever they do in their camp. And so, God's like, maybe they didn't hear me. So, a little louder. And then still, nobody does anything. And then a third time, whatever, you get the point. And then nobody comes, but they eventually decide to come up and stand at the border. So they come stand at the border, and you can imagine if you got, 3 times, I had my horn go off. You guys would be like trekking it up the mountain right now. Because he was ready to land, he was landing on the top, whatever. And what's really interesting about this, God asked Moses, hey, why didn't you all come up? And what Moses said, hey, but you told us, the people said, if we cross the border, we're going to die. And what happened was, Moses and all the people were so focused on the rule that they forgot the rest, that they could have a relationship and cross the border and go up after they heard the horn. And I think it's this thing that plays out everywhere. We'd rather focus on our playbook, our rules, rather than engage in relationship often. And God, your significant other, anybody who wants to have a relationship wants to engage. But sometimes we're like, oh, I'm going to engage by this playbook. And it kind of distances you from the relationship. And I don't know if you know what happened right after that in Exodus chapter 20. But what came? God was like, all right, if that's the way you want to play, here comes the 10 Commandments. And about 4 books of laws. If you want to interact with me with laws, you can do so. Though I would rather interact relationally. And I think that's an easy thing to have. Whenever I try to interact with my wife, Peggy, she was. Yeah, I know. Look at her too, okay? Sometimes we engage in, I'm trying to what do you want me to do? And she's thinking, I just want you to talk to me. Don't think about the playbook all the time. And this all the time happens in relationships. I recommend, and kind of what we've resolved ultimately, because you never know if you get, married or whatever, or do your thing. You don't never know if the relationship is going to last, because there's always ups and downs. And what Peggy and I have committed to within our relationship is we're just going to commit to each other. Because sometimes emotions will be high, just like exams. Sometimes they'll be low. They're not predictable. Sometimes it's due to us, sometimes it's outside of circumstances. And those are not predictable in life. But we can stay committed. And we're going to say, okay, long term, we're going to stick this out. And that's how we've worked this out. And what I recommend, if you don't have a friend in college, make a friend. And those ways that you interact with your friends in school through commitment and not letting like some gossip that comes up cause your friendship to go awry, those kind of committed relationships will build and be great practice for future deeper relationships that you're going to have if you decide to get married. Okay, here we go. Okay. One time, sometimes people like that guy who met me at the TED Talk who like flipped out on me in the green room, sometimes like him, he didn't think that spiritual things make sense. And I kind of like this intersection of the nexus of God and science. I think it's super interesting. And with modern science, if you watch a TED video, there's a lot of like ways I've seen that connect as I've done more looking into it and research and that sort of thing. And but sometimes it happens on an emotional basis, because I think if God's relational, sometimes it happens relationally. There was this one dude, I met this guy one time. Actually, I didn't meet him at first. I was in this group, and another student said, there's this weird student here. You need to talk to him, because I don't know what to tell him. So this weird student, whatever, he came up, he wanted to talk to me. He said, oh, I don't like, it's kind of like the guy in the TED room. Like, God doesn't make any sense to me, whatever. I was like, okay, let's reason this out. I'm cool with that. And we talked it out, and it was going nowhere. So I had this weird idea in my head. I was like, okay, man, I have an idea. What if I pray that God shows up and kind of, does whatever, shows up for you? He was like, and I thought it was a really weird idea, but he was like, cool, that sounds good. Like, okay, this is not making sense whatsoever, but you agreed to it. So, and then after a little bit, and then I said, hey man, you're so angsty. Do you want to tell God stuff? And I didn't think this was going to go down, but he was like, cool, that sounds good. So I kind of stood there, like imagine it's me and him. I was kind of standing there listening to him, this like really skeptical kind of agnostic guy, pray for about an hour. He had a lot to tell God, apparently. I was like, didn't know this was going to go this long. All right, that's cool. So I was listening for about an hour, and I kept asking him, are you done yet? He was like, no. Okay. All right, cool, man. I'll just stand here. He kept going. Finally, I was like, are you done? He's like, yeah. He's like, how do you feel? He's like, I feel pretty good. I like God now. I don't know where that came from. That's awesome, man. You do your thing. And then, what was really funny is a year later, I met one of his friends. And he had a friend that was kind of like him, but a year prior. And so, one time I saw him and his friend talking in one of these rooms, kind of a side room. I was like, well, that's really interesting. I knew both of them. And I was like, I'm going to go, later, I'm going to see what happened. And I saw his friend, second guy, kind of came out, and he was super excited. I was like, oh, what's going on? And I talked to the first guy, the guy that spent an hour praying while I was listening to him. And he said, guess what happened? This other guy likes God too. I was like, how's that possible? He didn't like God like an hour ago. He said, I just did the same thing that you did with me a year ago. I was like, what? Cool. However it works, because sometimes these things, and whatever it is, kind of works on a logical basis, it makes sense, perhaps on an emotional basis. When I got married to Peggy, when we were at the altar, I was not doing chemistry calculations. I was like, this feels right. This makes sense. I'm going to go for it. I think they'll say I do. That's logical, and people would be really weirded out if I did not say that. So, in all these areas, I think they mix up in a lot of interesting ways and overlap. And the one area I didn't mention yet is physical, and I guess you can take your protein supplements or whatever. But what I was thinking about this more in a particular vein is you should go just try this stuff. Just go do it. If you're not engaging all parts of yourself, then try to do so. Think about your relationships, how they're going. Think about your spiritual side. How's your academics going? Are you focusing on the wrong thing? And just go for it. Try something new this quarter and see how it goes. See if it affects the other areas of your life. Sound good? Cool. I'm done. All right. Thanks for coming.